What's going on, everyone? This is Dylan with Manoa Chocolate. Today we're going to talk about molds. This is something that we are continually learning a lot about, and we've mostly bought from one company on the East Coast called Tomric. We've also bought one other time from a company in Turkey. They gave us great molds at a really good price. There was just a language barrier and it was a bit hard to work with because we're in Hawaii and they're in Turkey, and so that's kind of as far as you can go. Time difference and language and stuff. So we still continue to work with Tomric. We have new molds coming out right now. And when you order molds, there's a lot of things to consider. One of them is that it takes a while and it's kind of expensive because there's a back and forth process and a lot of artwork involved. This is what initially comes, is a one cavity test mold so that you can make sure your bar is the right weight, that your design looks nice. And so when we received this is actually the second single mold that we received because we've made modifications. And so historically we had a much shallower mold where we filled the chocolate up to the very top because we didn't want this cupping effect that would happen in the chocolate. Now we prefer to have the mold deeper because when we run it down our vibrating conveyor, or when you tap it out and all the bubbles come out and it levels off, we don't want it running over the sides, creating a big mess because there's so much cleaning involved already. The last thing we want to do is add more. And so now we go at least 1/4 inch deep in our molds and don't fill it up to the top because when you're vibrating it, it's bouncing around violently and you don't want it to spill over the sides. So that's one thing to consider. We just learned about this, but there's a few ways to make molds. This one was done in an acid bath style where they've got the designs and then the acid, I believe, cuts out the mold. This gives you really good detail, but you have to have a flat mold. And when I say a flat mold, this one here is our 20-gram molds, and it's got a ridge that comes over and surrounds it kind of like a picture. So it's 2 layers, whereas the acid bath won't let you do that. This is all 1 layer, but we have a really pretty design on it. So these are going to affect the types of ways that they make your mold, which will affect the cost. This can be done with a CNC machine or an injection mold, which is a much more difficult process for the mold maker because they have to form 2 different layers and inject the material that your mold is made out of on the inside to create your shape. But they can do pretty much anything. It's just a more expensive setup and more expensive material. Our molds are made out of polycarbonate. That's all that we've ever used up to this point that we know of. So keep in mind, you have a whole bunch of art that you have to do. You have to send it to the mold maker. They have to then make a sample, but there's a bunch of back and forth in between that. You get your sample, you do your tests, make sure it's the right weight, make sure it feels nice. We like going with the thicker type of polycarbonate that they offer. I think it's 0.125 or something like that. Anyway, the thicker polycarbonate is what we prefer to go to because they do get beaten up. We don't want them to crack. So now we would approve that. They make another sample. This is another, we're doing co-packing for someone else. This is their mold. They send us this. We then do another test, and you have to make sure that your depositing head of your tempering machine, if you have one, lines up with the cavities of each mold in the right spot. So in this case, we had to get a new head, a new plate made to go onto our tempering machine. So this hooks onto our tempering machine. It then goes through and gets distributed through like a mesh it's a metal mesh with a whole bunch of perforations, spreads out, and it'll go through these holes and deposit perfectly into each cavity of the mold. We would then run this down our vibrating conveyor. So this works with our depositing head. We had to make this one special. I like trying to have as many molds on, many cavities on the mold as possible, because if I'm gonna stand there and stick this into underneath the depositing head, I wanna mold 5 bars or 4 bars if possible, if it's a 50 to 60 gram bar. I don't wanna do 3 because I'm still standing there spending the same amount of time. This one is our 20-gram bars. We squeezed 10 on here. So we deposit 10 bars in one shot and then run this down our vibrating conveyor. So just the economics of standing there for, if you're gonna do it for 6 to 8 hours, you wanna make sure you squeeze as many bars in there as possible since you're just standing there regardless in the same amount of time. If you can do 1 more bar a couple times a minute, that'll add up. So that's just some economics for you. Let's see. Quantity. So there's different bottlenecks that you're going to have in your process. In our case, we have our bottleneck with our refrigerators that cool off the bars. We can use up to about 150 molds before we hit our bottleneck where the fridges are full and we have to slow down. So we'd love a cooling tunnel which would speed us up, but for now we don't have the space or ability to do that. So 150 molds for us at 5 per cavity is our current necessity on the amount of molds that we need. And so you don't want less molds than you need, because then you're just standing there waiting for them to come back out of the fridge so you can re-warm them up and reuse them. After they pop out of the fridge, we have to put them into a little cabinet. It's very simple. It's a bakery cart with a cover on it, and we have a dehumidifier for the room that's blowing the air, the warm air, into that cabinet, which brings the molds to approximately the right temperature so that we can then use it again and deposit chocolate into it. Because if it's too hot or too cold, you're going to have problems with bloom. And we talked about that in the last tempering episode, which is still somewhat of a mystery to us, but we're starting to understand much better. If you can match the temperature of your mold to the temperature of the chocolate coming out, you're going to have way less problems. So yeah, so we covered the depositing head, the amount of cavities, and then it's just cleaning. We use these no lint cloth molds that we get from, I think these come from Costco, but we buy big bags of these, and they're great for cleaning the molds. They don't leave any lint or anything on the molds after, because you want to check your mold. You don't want hair or lint in the molds when you're putting it under the depositing head. So a lot of things to consider there. That's molds for you. We had a lot of questions on this one, so I hope this was helpful, brings a lot of value to you. Let us know what you think. Good luck. Happy chocolate making.